Hey out there. All right, so this live stream is going to be a little different. This is it's going to be a track walkthrough of a track I've recorded and made last summer in 2018. Let me show where you. Yeah, here it is. So it was released on the fantastic net label Codependent. Look for Code 218. That's the release name, also known as Limes, as you can see from the titles. So I'm going to cover how I composed and how I did the sound design and some of the synth hackery to get this track to work, and also how I do some of the performance for it as well. So the one catch with this is I am doing live synthesis to get this all to work. So I'm using this synth called Harmer in my digital audio workstation, and it's a little CPU intensive, so hopefully the stream will keep up okay. Yeah, so let's dive into it. So I'm not sure where to start exactly, other than here's the code. So this is the entire code for the track. So let me maybe just play it, and I think it's all reset to the default state here. So let me just kind of play how the track starts. Hopefully this works. All right, so that's a taste of what it is. So basically, I've got. Let me just break down how it starts. So I've got a drum pattern, which has some samples. I'm just using a kick drum and a snare sample. So here's the kick drum. And the clap. That's all there is for drums. Basically, yeah, and then the synth pattern is here, which has on line 18, I've got let me make this a little bit bigger. Line 18, I've got the notes that are played, which is just a C, 12 steps down from middle C, and a particular rhythm, which I'll cover up here in a sec, and then a speed modification. The drums also have that same speed modification. So maybe I'm just going to start with the drums so you can kind of see what's going on. Let's get this other crap out. So here's the drum pattern. And all right, so what the heck's going on? So all I'm doing is playing the bass drum from the Lime kit, and the actual rhythmic structure is coming from the N pattern, which is defined by this dpat variable. So it is a 10-step pattern. So I'm saying play the first sample in the folder on the first step, and then on this 7th step, play the clap. So that's all this dpat is it defines the rhythm and defines which samples out of the folder to play. And I've got this mod thing. So mod is what causes all of the weird time variation. Without mod, it would just sound like a 10-step sequence with no tempo change like this. But if we add the mod in, I'm using the space out function. I've got a YouTube tutorial on how to use that for doing time fluctuations. So what this does is it says take the cycle and then play it at regular speed, then play it at 1 1/10 times speed, then play it at 90% speed, then 95% speed. So it takes every cycle and then multiplies its time length by one of these numbers. And it goes through this whole list of numbers and then it starts over. So every time you hear that kick clap sequence, it's playing it at one of these speeds. And I made this list just I just typed a bunch of values in till it sounded okay. So that's why it sounds like that. So some cycles are fast, some are slow, and that's it. It's just kick, clap, kick, clap. What I wanted was a synth note that matched the bass drum and then truncated itself on the clap. So when you hear the bass drum, you hear the synth note, and then when you hear the clap, the synth gets cut off. And again, here's how that sounds. Okay, so how did I do that? So this is getting pretty specific into the synth that I use. This is not necessarily all title stuff. But let's get into it. So what I do is I have, just like the drum pattern, I don't know if indenting really helps show this at all. So these 3 lines here are the same 3 lines as this drum pattern. I'm saying play a note with a particular pattern and then modify the tempo. That pattern is S-pat, which is synth pat, and it's the gain or the velocity of the MIDI note. So it's playing it at a gain of 1.1, which puts it at a high velocity, and then on that 7th step it puts it at 0.4, which is a low velocity. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mute the drum pattern for a sec. So I'm taking advantage of a specific property of the synth that I use to get the note to cut off. I could use legato, I suppose, perhaps. Anyway, not going to go there. So let me show you what I did. I'm going to play it. Oops, I don't have that function. Let's make a function quick. Let G equal const. Sorry, this is G is my mute function, and I did not have that defined anywhere. Okay, so here's the synth playing. So if I go into my synth here, I'm not sure if it's going to come through on the video very well, but you'll see when the velocity is, or the gain is at 1.1, that makes a velocity that shows up right where my mouse cursor is here. Hopefully you can see that on the stream. And you'll see a little vertical gray line show up in this this graph that allows me to map the incoming velocity to the actual volume of the synth. And then when the gain pattern is 0.4, it actually produces a MIDI velocity that is almost near 0 down at the bottom of this graph. And I have my synth set to kill all notes, so it's basically making it a monophonic synth. So when it's silent, it's actually playing, but it's playing with 0 volume. So I've made this curve to do that. If I change this curve to have a louder volume, you can actually, should be able to hear it. Oh, no, I'm just making a mess. No, that didn't do it. Okay, well, I don't want to get into my synth specifics too much, but basically that's how I truncate the synth note. Okay. So that's all the rhythmic sequencing. That's the sequencing part. The next thing is kind of getting into some of the modulation that happens. So I've got 3 different control change messages happening here. This first one we're going to ignore. The second 2 happen on control change 1 and 2. So this is obviously using title MIDI. And in the background, in fact, if I mute the sequence but let the CC or the control change patterns play, you can see that these X and Y knobs are turning. And those are coming from these 2 control change messages. So I've got a control change 1, basically every 4 times per cycle, sending a note using the space out tempo modification, doing a little bit of degradation, so sometimes some of these don't fire. And then I'm randomly setting the value to somewhere on the full control change scale. Shout out to Callum Gunn. Thanks for tuning in. Okay. Where was I? I totally got thrown off. I'm off my game now. All right, so these 2 control change messages are getting fired off, and they're making this XY controller thing go. But what's cool is in this specific synth, it's fine. In the specific synth in FL Studio, it's not a Harmor specific feature. It's something you can do in FL Studio when you want to wire up a knob to control change parameter in MIDI. So I've got it listening on my specific MIDI channel on control number 1, but I added smoothing. So what happens is it takes 1 second for a change, for a control change message to move from one spot to the next. So if I disable smoothing, I want to show you what it's going to look like. Disable smoothing. And now if I play it, go back, you'll see it jumps around very sharply, which results in a much more jagged sounding synth patch. So as those settings move around, you get a lot of jumping while the note's playing, which is not what I want. So I just introduced smoothing to make it smooth. So now you get a much smoother sounding thing. So all that variation has a smooth sound to it. Okay, the other thing I do in this track is so this patch is very simple. It's just a sawtooth wave. That's all it is. And the X and Y mod just use a couple of custom filter shapes. Now this is a specific feature of the Harmor synth, but I've got one filter shape that looks like this, and it scoops out frequencies in this area, and then a second filter shape that looks different. And these knobs, the cutoff points of those filters, are mapped to the X and Y controller. So then you get all this phase canceling as those knobs are turned. But the other thing I do in the track, another advertisement for Codependent. The other thing I do is I add some detuning. So I've got a unison going of 5 voices, but they're all, there's no detuning. I've got the detune. That looks really cool, by the way. So Harmor's got this harmonics visualizer thing. It's fun to look at. So I can, I've got the Z knob wired up to the pitch, the unison detune. So if I increase the Z knob, So all that's doing is just detuning 5 unique voices. I've also got in the harmonic unison pitch a different distribution of detuning. So the kind of this mids area has more detuning in it compared to the lower part. Yeah. I guess I'm getting a lot more into the sound design than I was expecting, but that's okay. There's only one more thing to really cover, and that's the phaser. So in addition to the detuning, there's also the phaser knob, and I don't have them wired up at the moment. Let's get those wired up. Let's do CCV 0, CCN3, so that's the detune, and there's the phaser on 4. So if I change the detune to 127, it should be fully detuned. Yep. Sure is. So the other thing is the phaser here. So if I turn the phaser on, put that at 127. There's the phaser. So the phaser also has kind of a weird shape to it as well. Harmer's got different types of filter shapes, different ways of distributing harmonics across that shape. I've got this harmonic thing as opposed to octave or hertz. I'm not even sure what it all means. And then you can adjust some of the parameters of the phaser, like the width and its offset. I'm not going to touch those because if I do, the sound will change significantly. Hell, I've got this patch saved elsewhere. I can show you. So if I change the width, we'll put it back on there. The offset. So it just kind of changes where that phaser has an effect. Okay, so that's all the sound design. So really all this track is taking those 4 control change parameters and kind of moving them around. But wait, there's one more thing, and that is that halfway through the track I add a downward pitch note. I should mention that I've got a pitch envelope that so the shape of the pitch actually looks like this. If I play it, so you can see this upward slope here. That's how the pitch rises. So the cool thing about Harmer is it's got a part B. So if I go to the part B tab, I duplicated the part from part A, and I can put this crossfader over on part B, and that'll play the part B patch instead of part A. So as you can see, I've got a different pitch envelope for part B, and that just pitches the sound down. Otherwise, it's the identical patch. The only difference between A and B is this pitch envelope. And I control this crossfade mixer thing with a MIDI control change parameter 100. That one is not smooth. That one I want to be snappy, so that moves instantly. And that is right here. So when I introduce the second note in the sequence, instead of having a low velocity, I put that also at 1.1. And then that crossfade slider thing is this F-pat. So I changed the value from 0 to 127, so the slider is always moving. So it sounds like this. So you can see that little crossfader moving around. But both the A and the B parts are identical, so they share the same control changes, share the same sound design parameters, and so on. And I can add the detuning back in for fun. Put the drums back in. And you get a different effect if you have both the detuning and phaser on, or just one or the other on. So I'll pick the detuning one. And now we're back at the start. So that's it. That's the track. I didn't think the stream would be so short. We could do another one. Curious if there's any questions. By the way, my drink had a... Can you hear that? The bubbles are making this kind of ringy tone. It was louder earlier. I thought that was really cool. Okay, so that's the Lime track with Harmer and Title and a few samples. So basically, to recap, I've got this 10-step sequence, and I am setting the gain or the volume of different parts of the synth patch, turn them on or off. So I just live code this if I perform, change the values, the crossfader pattern, the drum pattern. This is the sample pattern, kick, and then clap. And then I've got, what's CPAT? Forgot what that is. CPAT. What's CPAT? Did I cover that? Am I even using CPAT? What is that? Well, anyway. It's there. And then the tempo changes are happening from space out. And yeah, drums, synths. And then, so the crossfader, or here's the synth note. The crossfader happens at the same, exact same timing as when the notes are played. And then that, the key thing to get all of those smooth transitions in the modulation, kind of exploiting that smoothness in the DAW of the smoothing with a control change parameter. Constantly moving the X and Y controller with these two control changes. And then I've got detune and phaser control change. That's it. Okay. Should we do another one? I'm not really prepared to talk about another one, but that was really short. We could do another Lime. Let's put that on here as well. Another Lime. So this is also a Harmer type thing. In fact, I think this uses the exact same approach. So here's another Lime. It's a lot bigger. This one, as I recall, I took a sequencing approach that Daniel M. Carlson takes with, well, before explaining it, maybe I should listen to it. Yeah, let's just listen to this, see what it sounds like. You can look at the pretty visualization as it goes. All right, so that uses the exact same technique as the first Lime track by mapping the incoming MIDI velocity to a low, to either high or low volume. So when how do I do that? Oh yeah, here it is, right here. So the not drums pattern, that's the synth. So sometimes I've got this variation amount, which is 25%. So 25% of the notes get a gain of 0.4, which causes the volume to be mapped down to a zero volume. So this grid is just a mapping of the incoming gain to actual synth volume. So if I play it again, watch this little vertical gray line. It's either up here or it's down near zero. And since I've got monophonic set to kill same, it kills the same sound. So when it goes to a 0 volume, it kills the playing sound. All right, and then so that technique is kind of core to these tracks, I guess, to be able to mute a sound that's playing. And then on the drums side, again, I've got a drum kit where I'm playing the sample N2, which is the third sample in the folder, which is another kick drum. And then I change it to the clap 25% of the time. So that random variation happens at the same time as the random variation of the synth being turned on or off. Yeah, it is nuts. So I don't need that. I don't need this MIDI chan there. I've already got it defined in the stack. So, okay, drum pattern. Let's talk about the speeds a little bit. So this speeds is just setting, where is it? I've got my S here, way up on the end of this top part of the pattern. My S pattern, or my sound pattern, is sending out some kind of, how does this work? Replicate. Replicate will make 5 instances of MIDI times 1, 5 instances of MIDI times 2, 5 instances of MIDI times 3, 10 of MIDI times 5, 10 of times 6, and so on. So I basically create this giant array of that many of each of these multiplications of the MIDI sound. So I would end up with 20 plus 18, or I'm sorry, 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, you know, that many items in this RandCat array. So one of these sequences is going to get picked. The ones that have more replicates are going to get chosen more often. You could do, it's kind of like a weighted choose in a way, but for RandCat. RandCat will randomly select a pattern. And then what is this? Slow. Oh, and then I randomly choose a slowness. So most of the time it's slowness of 1, sometimes it's a slowness of 2. And I also remove some of the notes, 40% of the notes. Too many words. I don't know. How else do you explain this? Okay, so that gets fed into the speeds. So it's saying play the drums with those speeds is what it's doing. It's a really goofy way to sequence something, but that's kind of what I was going for. And then on top of all that, some of the notes randomly get changed to a clap. So on the synth side, I'm sending this -6, which is like a F sharp or something. I don't know. Sequencing it with the same speeds, and then doing the same kind of variation to turn it on or off. Then the rest is all just control change stuff. And it's kind of just random. So I've got my crossfader here on control change 100. Sometimes, so whenever the clap goes on, it changes it to the B side. So again, here's the Harmer crossfader. I don't know why I put it on the B side. I don't even play anything on when it's over there. Well, anyway, who knows? I could probably take this line out. I'm not going to do that right now, though. And then I've got my XY controller right here, XYZ controller on 1, 2, and 3. Pretty sure I've got my X controller wired up to... What is it wired up to? I've got my custom filter shape 1 mapped to X, custom filter shape 2 mapped to Y. Detune is probably mapped to Z. Yep. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7. I think 4 is the Prism. Prism is weird. Let's turn the phaser off for a sec here. So this is a square wave. Just started it as a square wave. If I turn the prism off, turn the detuning all the way down. What else do I have going on here? Unison pitch thick, that's the detune. And then I've got a little bit of a weird detune shape to it. So the higher frequencies get detuned more. The filter shapes are causing a little bit of phase cancellation. Okay, so then the prism, it takes harmonics and it like moves them apart or squishes them together. So it takes a harmonic in your sound and actually alters it. So if I play, if you look on the right hand side here of the if I move the prism, you'll see the harmonics like stretch and they cross. It doesn't even make sense. Seriously, it doesn't make sense. And I've got the phaser too. Which is, I think I've got an envelope on the width. Nope, that's turned off. An envelope, no. I think that weird. Oh, I know what it is. I think that weird swirling in the phaser there is coming from the pitch envelope. It's this little turn up in the pitch there. So my pitch envelope has an attack, like a kick drum. If I turn the pitch envelope off, yeah, then you don't see that in the phaser. So because I've picked a hertz distribution on the phaser and this frequency mapping, I don't even understand what this shit is, but it then has an interaction with the pitch of the note itself. So the phaser is actually moving differently with the pitch as the pitch envelope changes. Okay, and then I've got control changes on, pretty sure 4 is the prism, 5 is the phaser amount, 6 is the phaser width, and 7 is the phaser offset. So that's all of these green knobs and the prism thing. So they're just getting moved around randomly, quite literally. So I am taking Untitled, just telling them to be shifted around randomly between 0 and 127, and then they get sampled and held at a rate of every 4 cycles. So they kind of get a random value and then they stick for a while. Everything's got a smoothing factor on it. So if you look, I'm using that smoothing on everything, I think. Yeah, everything's got a smoothing. So when something changes, it has a... It sounds like it's kind of being turned by hand rather than just a sudden jump because the code changed it. Kind of sped through that, I guess. I don't. It's a lot of talking. I don't know. So this track, it kind of just plays itself. I just run it and it kind of goes. But the live codable parts, if I wanted to really perform this, I could change how slow it gets. Like I could sometimes make it get really slow, 3, 4, 5 times as slow, or double fast. Quadruple fast. So there's ways kind of at a meta level to play with this track. I wouldn't totally like changing this block live is a little trickier. I mean, I could totally remove sections or change how often certain slow parts play. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's lots of stuff you could use and do yeah, here with replicate, comment stuff out. Let's try that. So if I comment this line out, yeah, cool. So if I only wanted really slow sequences, I could remove lines, like so. So these more dense sequences are not firing at all right now. Thanks for the suggestion. I don't think I'd ever played with this in that way. Cool. I could change how often those claps fire. So 5% instead of 25%. Or I could make them 90%. We can make it almost all claps. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, these tracks were just kind of a silly exploration of Harmor, taking a simple sound and then just detuning, doing the crazy stuff with the Prism and the phaser, and trying to exploit that velocity mapping so that when something I can control, if something comes in at a lower volume or a lower velocity, then actually turn the synth off through the velocity mapping, and then make it monophonic so it stops playing. I've got one more I could do that's in here. I'm going to perform these tracks on Monday, so that's why they're kind of prepped and ready to go. So let's do the last one, which is Yet Another Lime. And yeah, okay. So this one, I'm just going to play it, and then we can listen or analyze. Slower than I remember it going in the past. So same idea with this one. I think it's pretty much the same types of controls that are being automated. And yeah, you can see I've got the velocity mapping thing going on. The one, I can't talk while that's playing. The one thing that really makes this kind of live for me is just muting a couple different parts. So I've got two synth parts, one that's playing in the gaps, which is what you heard. You'll hear the kick drum and the kick clap kind of playing together, and then they stop, and then a synth note just plays out of nowhere. And so that's this mute one. So that's, sorry, synth accent. That's the synth accent pattern. And I've got a mute one function on it, which allows me to mute it if I want. Right now it's set to ID, which means don't do anything, just let it play normally. But I've got a second synth that I call the glitch, which will play on the kick drum and clap notes as well. And I can turn that on by, instead of muting it with my G function. I don't know why my mute function is named G, by the way. I think it started as GTFO and I just shortened it to G. Anyway, so if I want, I can then have kind of this random synth playing on top of all the kick drums. So I'll turn that on here. Turn the was kind of surprised that that many notes and this much data over control changes. So here's my control change patterns right here. That's a lot of data that can get sequenced pretty fast, and it keeps up just fine. So every note, there's like a dozen not a dozen, about 8 things that get sent to Harmor over MIDI. So I'm kind of surprised it works, but it does. I'm using a USB MIDI interface that loops back on itself to send it back. Send it back into into my software. Just bumped my drum machine. Okay. So I'm not going to get into the sound design stuff as much because it's pretty much the same as what those other tracks were. It's I'm using a square wave, manipulating the Prism and the phaser and detuning and all that stuff. All the control change mapping is the same. But the sequencing, I guess, is where the interesting part is. So let's just look at the drums for a sec. So here's the drum pattern. So I've got my line kit, and N, 4 and 5. So 4 is the kick drum, and 5 is the clap. And I'm using the replicate technique again to cause the variation for when it stops playing, and for how dense the pattern is. So, okay, I've got a random array, not a random array, an array built from different densities of sequences. So 1 per cycle, 2 per cycle, 3 per cycle, 4, 5, 6, 7 per cycle. And the more dense patterns are more likely to, there's more of them added. So I've got 7 copies of the 7 per cycle sequence added, 6 copies of the 6 per cycle sequence added. I'm not going to say all that for all of these, but you get a big array of sequences. Then the last one is this how often, so 15. So I get 15 copies of, let me go back to the drums here, 15 copies of nothing that happens. So this is when the drums turn off. So they play when any of these sequences are on, and then this how often, it will add 15 of those, and it won't play anything. So then on the synth side, so if we go back and bring the synths in, so that synth accent is opposite. So it has this same replications. Off gain is 0.4, which kind of maps it to a silent note. So the synth is not playing for all of the same notes when the drums are playing. But when the drums get turned off, that synth gets turned on with on gain, and on gain is set to 1. So it's really kind of this inverted pattern using the same amounts of replicated sequences. Then that glitchy synth that plays with the drums, it has more of the same structure that the drums do, where they're on when the synth plays and they're off when that accent plays. And then all of the control change values are randomized on every step using this control gain pattern, which is here, which is again the same sequencing. I love to talk, apparently. That's a lot of words. Yeah, so a meta-binary pattern for functions. Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's kind of, I don't know how the heck I dreamed this up, but it basically takes, it's like this meta pattern above the actual patterns, kind of a second level of turning things on and off, and just trying to exploit that. But yeah, once I discovered that glitchy pattern that plays with the drums can keep up over MIDI, it was kind of nuts. You can just totally change the patch on every step. So I think it's the glitch or the accent plays on A or B. I forget which is which. Yeah, so it's the accent that plays on A, and that glitchy part that plays with the kick drums is on B. Change it back. All right. Hopefully you get the idea. Looks like a few of you found this episode interesting. So yeah, it's just kind of I just wanted to cover how I orchestrate a lot of these control changes and sequencing in Untitled to control external synths. And these tracks in particular were designed to be just super stupid, ridiculous sounds and sequences that didn't really have any specific tempo or follow any real grid-like rules for sequencing. Just truly taking, a lot of the tools at my disposal in Tidal with randomness and picking random sequences and just running with it. Yes, it is high art. So if you enjoy these tracks, go check them out on Codependent. There's 3 more that I did not cover that are all pretty similar. I don't have those ready to go though, so apologize. Okay. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Maybe I'll do another one of these walkthroughs with a more normal track, or not. I don't know. We'll keep it weird. Okay. All right. Have a good rest of your Friday, and I'll see you in the future. Click, 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 click.